Hey guys, it's Cassidy again, and today we're gonna pick up where we left off on the inheritance games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. And last time we stopped on chapter 23. Alright, so chapter 23. I've slotted you into American Studies and Philosophy of Mindfulness. In science and math, you should be able to continue on with your current course of study, assuming our course load doesn't prove to be too much. Dr. McGowan took a sip of her coffee. I did the same. It was just as good as Thea had promised it would be, and that made me wonder how much truth there was to the rest of what she'd said. It must be hard living in that house with those boys. They were a twisted, broken mess before you got here, and they'll be a twisted, broken mess once you're gone. Now, Dr. Mack, she'd insisted on being called, continued, in terms of electives, I would suggest Making Meaning, which focuses on the study of how meaning is conveyed through the arts and includes a strong component of civic engagement with local museums, artists, theater productions, the ballet company, the opera, and so on. Given the support the Hawthorne Foundation has traditionally provided to these endeavors, I believe you will find the course useful. The Hawthorne Foundation? I managed just barely to avoid repeating the words. Now, for the rest of your schedule, I will need you to tell me about a bit of your plans for the future. What are you passionate about, Avery? It was on the tip of my tongue to tell her what I told Principal Altman. I was a girl with a plan, but that plan had always been driven by practicalities. I picked a college major that would get me a solid job. The practical thing to do now was to stay the course. The school had to give more resources than my old one. They could help me game standardized tests, maximize the college credit I received in high school, put me in the perfect position to finish college in 3 years instead of 4. If I played my cards right, even if Zara and her husband somehow ended up undoing what Tobias Hawthorne had done, I could come out ahead. But Dr. Mack hadn't just asked about my plans. She'd asked what I was passionate about, and even if the Hawthorne family did manage to successfully challenge the will, I'd probably still get a payout. How many millions of dollars might they be willing to pay me just to go away? If worst came to worst, I could probably sell my story for more than enough to pay for college. Travel, I blurted out. I've always wanted to travel. Why? Dr. Mack peered at me. What is it that attracts you to other places? The art, the history, the people and their cultures? Or are you drawn to the marvels of the natural world? Do you want to see mountains and cliffs, oceans, the rainforests? Yes, I said fiercely. I could feel tears stinging in my eyes, and I wasn't entirely sure why. To all of it, yes. Dr. Mack reached out and took my hand. I'll get you a list of electives to look at, she said softly. I understand that study abroad won't be an option for the next year due to your rather unique circumstances, but we have some marvelous programs you might consider thereafter. You might even entertain the idea of delaying graduation a bit. If someone had told me a week earlier that there was anything that could tempt me to stay in high school even a minute longer than necessary, I would have thought they were delusional. But this wasn't a normal school. Nothing about my life was normal anymore. Chapter 24. Max called me back around noon. At Heights Country Day School, modular scheduling meant that there were gaps in my schedule during which I wasn't expected to be anywhere in particular. I could wander the halls, I could spend time in a dance studio, a dark room, or one of the mini gymnasiums. When precisely I ate lunch was up to me. So when Max called and I ducked into an empty classroom, no one stopped me, and no one cared. This place is heaven, I told Max. Actual heaven. The mansion? Max asked. The school, I breathed. You should see my schedule, and the classes. Avery, Max said sternly, it is my understanding that you have inherited roughly $1 bazillion, and you want to talk about your new school? There was so much I wanted to talk to her about. I had to think to remember what she knew and what she didn't. Jameson Hawthorne showed me the letter his grandfather left him, and it's this insane, twisty, puzzle-riddle thing. Jameson's convinced that's what I am, a puzzle to be solved. I'm currently looking up a picture of Jameson Hawthorne, Max announced. I heard a flush in the background and realized she must have been in the bathroom, at a school that wasn't as lax about student free time as this one. Gotta say, he's faxable. It took me a second to catch on. Max. I'm just saying, he looks like he knows his way around a fax machine. He's probably really great at dialing the numbers. I bet he's even faxed long distance. I have no idea what you're even talking about anymore, I told her. I could practically hear her grinning. Neither do I, and I'm going to stop now because we don't have much time. My parents are freaking out about all this. Now's not the time for me to be skipping class. Your parents are freaking out? I frowned. Why? Avery, do you know how many calls I've gotten? A reporter showed up at our house. My mom's threatening to lock my social media, my email, everything. I've never thought of my friendship with Max as particularly public, but it definitely wasn't a secret either. Reporters want to interview you, I said, trying to wrap my mind around it. About me? Have you seen the news? Max asked me. I swallowed. No. There was a pause. Then maybe don't. That piece of advice spoke volumes. This is a lot, Ave. Are you okay? I blew a hair out of my face. I'm fine. I've been assured by my lawyer and my head of security that a murder attempt is highly unlikely. You have a bodyguard, Max said, awed. Son of a beach, your life is cool now. I have a staff, servants, who hate me, by the way. The house is unlike anything I've ever seen. And the family. These boys, Max, they have patents and world records, and I'm looking at pictures of all of them now, Max said. Come to mama, you delicious mustards. Mustards? I echoed. Bastions? She tried. I let out a snort of laughter. I hadn't realized how badly I needed this until she was there. I'm sorry, Ave, I have to go. Text me, but watch what I say, I filled in. And in the meantime, buy yourself something nice. Like what? I asked. I'll make you a list, she promised. Love you, Beach. Love you too, Max. I kept the phone up to my ear for a second or two after she was gone. I wish you were here. Eventually, I managed to find the cafeteria. There were maybe 2 dozen people eating. One of them was Thea. She nudged a chair out from under her table with her foot. She's Zara's niece, I reminded herself, and Zara wants me gone. Still, I sat. I'm sorry if I came on a little strong this morning. Thea glanced at the other girls at the table, all of whom were as possibly polished and beautiful as she was. It's just that, in your position, I'd want to know. I recognized the bait for what exactly it was, but I couldn't keep myself from asking. Know what? About the Hawthorne brothers. For the longest time, every boy wanted to be them, and everyone who likes boys wanted to date them. The way they look, the way they act, Thea paused. Even just being Hawthorne adjacent changed the way that people look at you. I used to study with Sanders sometimes, one of the other girls said, before she trailed off. Before what? I was missing something here. Something big. They were magic. Thea had the oddest expression on her face. And when you were in their orbit, you felt like magic too. Invincible, someone else chimed in. I thought about Jameson, dropping down from a second-story balcony the day we'd met, Grayson sitting behind Principal Altman's desk and banishing him from the room with an arch of his brow. And then there was Xander, 6'3", grinning, bleeding, and talking about robots exploding. They aren't what you think they are, Thea told me. I wouldn't want to live in a house with the Hawthorns. Was this an attempt to get under my skin? If I left Hawthorne House, if I moved out, I'd lose my inheritance. Did she know that? Had her uncle put her up to this? Coming into today, I'd expected to be treated like trash. I wouldn't have been surprised if the girls at the school had been possessive over the Hawthorne boys, or if everyone, male and female, had resented me on the boys' behalf. But this was something else. I should go. I stood, but Thea stood with me. Think what you want about me, she said, but the last girl at the school who got tangled up with the Hawthorne brothers, the last girl who spent hour after hour in the house, she died. Chapter 25. I left the cafeteria as soon as I choked down my food, unsure where I was going to hide until my next class and equally uncertain that Thea had been lying. The last girl who spent hour after hour in that house. My brain kept relaying the words. She died. I made it down one hallway and was turning another when Xander Hawthorne popped out of a nearby lab, holding what appeared to be a mechanical dragon. All I could think about was what Thea had just said. You look like you could use a robotic dragon, Xander told me. Here. He thrust it into my hands. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked. That depends on how attached you are to your eyebrows. Xander raised his one remaining eyebrow very high. I tried to summon up reply, but I had nothing. Are you hungry? Xander asked me. The refectory is back that way. As much as I hated letting Thea win, I was weary. Of him, of all things Hawthorne. Refectory? I repeated, trying to sound normal. Xander grinned. It's prep school for cafeteria. Prep school isn't a language, I pointed out. Next you'll be telling me that French isn't one either. Xander patted the robotic dragon on its head. It burped. A wisp of smoke rose from its mouth. They aren't what you think they are. I could hear Thea warning me. Are you okay? Xander asked, and then he snapped his fingers. Thea got to you, didn't she? I handed the dragon back to him before it could explode. I don't want to talk about Thea. As it so happens, Xander said, I hate talking about Thea. Shall we discuss your little meeting with Jameson last night instead? He knew his brother had been to my room. You and your... Wait. Oh, sorry. I had no idea whether or not that was supposed to be a secret. Jameson showed you his letter, didn't he? Jameson thinks it's a clue, I said. Xander was quiet for a moment, then nodded in the opposite direction from the refectory. Come on. I followed him because it was either that or found myself another empty classroom. I used to lose, Xander said suddenly as we rounded a corner. On Saturday mornings, when my grandfather set us to a challenge, I always lost. I had no idea why he was telling me this. I was the youngest, the least competitive, the most apt to be distracted by scones or complex machinery. But, I prompted. I could hear in his tone that there was one. But, Xander replied, while my brothers were trying to take one another down in the race to the finish line, I was generously sharing my scones with the old man. He was awfully chatty, full of stories and facts and contradictions. Would you like to hear one? A contradiction? I asked. A fact. Xander wiggled his eyebrows. Or eyebrow. He didn't have a middle name. What? I asked. My grandfather was born Tobias Hawthorne, Xander told me. No middle name. I wondered if the old man had signed Xander's letter the way he signed Jameson's, Tobias Tattersall Hawthorne. He'd signed mine with initials, 3 of them. If I asked you to show me your letter, would you? I asked Xander. He said that he usually came in last in their grandfather's games. That didn't mean he wasn't playing this one. Now, where would the fun be in that? Xander deposited me in front of the thick wooden door. You'll be safe from Thea in there. There are some places even she dares not to tread. I glanced through the clear pane on the door. The library? The archive, Xander corrected. It's prep school for library. Not a bad place to hang out during free mods if you're looking to get some time alone. Hesitantly, I pushed the door open. You coming? I asked him. He closed his eyes. I can't. He didn't offer any more explanation than that. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Maybe multiple somethings. The last girl who spent hour after hour in that house, she died. Chapter 26. The archive looked more like a university library than one that belonged in a high school. The room was full of archways and stained glass. Countless shelves were brimming with books of every kind, and at the center of the room there were a dozen rectangular tables. State-of-the-art, with lights built into the tables and enormous magnifying glasses attached to the sides. All the tables were empty except for one. A girl sat with her back to me. She had auburn hair, a darker red than I'd ever seen on a person. I sat down several tables away from her, facing the door. The room was silent except for the sound of the other girl turning the pages of the book she was reading. I withdrew Jameson's letter and my own from my bag. Tattersall. I dragged my finger over the middle name with which Tobias Hawthorne had signed Jameson's missive, then looked at the initial scrawled on mine. The handwriting matched. Something nagged at me, and it took me a moment to realize what it was. He used the middle name in the will, too. What if that was the catch here? What if that was all it took to invalidate the terms? I texted Elisa. The reply came immediately. Legal name change years ago. We're good. Xander had said that his father was born Tobias Hawthorne, no middle name. Why tell me that at all? Deeply doubting that I would ever understand anyone with the last name Hawthorne, I reached for the magnifying glass attached to the table. It was the size of my hand. I placed the 2 letters side by side beneath it and turned on the lights built into the table. Chalk one up for private schools. The paper was thick enough that the light didn't shine through, but the magnifying glass made quick work of blowing the writing up 10 times its normal size. I adjusted the glass, bringing the signature on Jameson's letter into focus. I could see details now on Tobias Hawthorne's handwriting that I hadn't been able to see before. A slight hook on his R's, asymmetry on his capital T's, and there, in his middle name, was a noticeable space, twice that between any other 2 letters. Magnified, that space made the name appear as 2 words. Tattersall. Tattersall. As in he left them all in tatters? I wondered out loud. It was a leap, but it didn't feel like much of one. Not when Jameson had been so sure there was more to this letter than met the eye. Not when Xander had made it a point to tell me about his grandfather's lack of a middle name. If Tobias Hawthorne had changed his name to add in Tattersall, that strongly suggested he'd chosen the name himself. To what end? I looked up, suddenly remembering that I wasn't alone in the room, but the girl with the dark red hair was gone. I shot off another text to Elisa. When did TH change his name? Did the name change correspond to the moment he decided to leave his family and the billionaire version of Tatters, to leave everything to me? A text came through a moment later, but it wasn't from Elisa. It was from Jameson. I had no idea how he'd ever gotten the number for this new phone or my last. I see it now, Mr. Girl. Do you? I looked around, feeling like he might be watching me from the wings, but by all indications I was alone. No, the middle name? I typed back. No. I waited, and a second text came through a full minute later. The sign-off. My gaze went to the end of Jameson's letter. Right before the signature, there were 2 words. Don't judge. Don't judge the Hawthorne patriarch for dying without ever telling his family he was sick. Don't judge the games he was playing from beyond the grave. Don't judge the way he had pulled the rug out from underneath his daughters and grandsons. I looked back at Jameson's text, then to the letter, then read it again from the beginning. Better the devil you know than the one you don't. Or is it? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. All that glitters is not gold. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. There but for the grace of God go I. I imagined being Jameson, getting this letter, wanting answers and being given platitudes instead. Proverbs. My brain supplied the alternate term, and my eyes darted back to the sign-off. Jameson had thought we were looking for a wordplay or a code. Every line in this letter, bearing the proper names, was a proverb or a slight variation thereon. Every line except one. Don't judge. I'd missed most of my English teacher's lecture on proverbs, but there was only one I could think of that started with those 2 words. Does "don't judge a book by its cover" mean anything to you? I asked Jameson. His reply was immediate. Very good, Eris. Then a moment later. It sure as hell does. Chapter 27. We could be making something out of nothing, I said hours later. Jameson and I stood in the Hawthorne House library, looking up at the shelves circling the room, filled with books from 18 foot ceiling to floor. Hawthorne born or Hawthorne made, there's always something to be played. Jameson spoke with a sing-song rhythm, like a child skipping rope. But when he brought his gaze down from the shelves to me, there was nothing childlike in his expression. Everything is something in a Hawthorne house. Everything, I thought, and everyone. Do you know how many times in my life one of my grandfather's puzzles has sent me to this room? Jameson turned slowly in a circle. He's probably rolling in his grave that it took me this long to see it. What do you think you were looking for? I asked. What do you think we're looking for, Eris? Jameson had a way of making everything sound like it was either a challenge or an invitation. Or both. Focus, I told myself. I was here because I wanted answers at least as much as the boy beside me did. If the clue is a book by its cover, I said, turning the riddle over in my mind, then I guess what we're looking for is either a book or a cover. Maybe a mismatch between the two. A book that doesn't match its cover. Jameson's expression gave no hint of what he thought of that suggestion. I could be wrong. Jameson's lips twisted, not quite a smile, not quite a smirk. Everyone is a little wrong sometimes, Eris. An invitation and a challenge. I had no intention of being a little wrong, not with him. The sooner my body remembered that, the better. I physically turned away from Jameson to do a 360, slowly taking in the scope of the room. Just looking up at the shelves felt like standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. We were completely encircled by books, going up 2 stories. There must be thousands of books in here, given how big the library was, given how high the shelves went up. If we were looking for a book mismatched to its cover sleeve, this could take hours, I said. Jameson smiled, with teeth this time. Don't be ridiculous, Eris. It could take days. We worked in silence. Neither one of us slept or dinner. A thrill ran through my body each time I realized that I was holding a first edition. Every once in a while, I'd flip a book open to find it signed. Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, Toni Morrison. Eventually, I managed to stop pausing in awe at what I held in my hands. I lost track of time. Lost track of everything except the rhythm of pulling off shelves and covers off books. Replacing the cover, replacing the book. I could hear Jameson working. I could feel him in the room as we moved through our prospective shelves, closer and closer to each other. He'd taken the upper level. I was working down below. Finally, I glanced up to see him right on top of me. "What if we're wasting our time?" I asked. My question echoed through the room. "Time is money, Eris. You have plenty to waste." "Stop calling me that." "I have to call you something, and you didn't appreciate Mystery Girl or the abbreviation of it." It was on the tip of my tongue to point out that I didn't call him anything. I hadn't said his name once since entering this room, but somehow, instead of offering that retort, I looked up at him, and a different question came out of my mouth instead. "What did you mean in the car today? When you said that the last thing I needed was for anyone to see us together?" I could hear him taking books off shelves and covers off books and replacing them both, again and again, before I got a response. "You spent the day at the fine institution that is Heights Country Day," he said. "What do you think I meant?" He always had to be the one asking questions, always had to turn everything around. "Don't tell me," Jameson murmured up above, "that you didn't hear any whispers." I froze, thinking about what I had heard. "I met a girl." I made myself continue working my way through the shelf. Book off, book on, book reshelved. Cover on, book reshelved. "Thea." Jameson snorted. "Thea isn't a girl. She's a whirlwind wrapped in a hurricane wrapped in steel. And every girl at that school follows her lead, which means I'm persona non grata, and I have been for a year." He paused. "What did Thea say to you?" Jameson's attempt to sound casual might have fooled me if I'd been looking at his face, but without the expression to sell it, I heard a telltale note underneath. He cares. Suddenly, I wished I hadn't brought Thea up. Sowing discord was probably her goal. "Avery?" Jameson's use of my given name confirmed for me that he didn't want a response. He needed one. Thea kept talking about this house," I said carefully, "about what it must be like for me to live here." That was true, or true enough. About all of you. "Is it still a lie?" Jameson asked loftily. "If you're masking what matters, but what you're saying is technically true." He wanted the truth. "Thea said there was a girl and that she died." I spoke like I was ripping off a bandage, too fast to second guess what I was saying. Overhead, the rhythm of Jameson's work slowed. I counted 5 seconds of utter silence before he spoke. "Her name was Emily." I knew, though I couldn't pinpoint how, that he wouldn't have said it if I'd been able to see his face. "Her name was Emily," he repeated, "and she wasn't just a girl." My breath caught in my throat. I forced it out and kept checking books because I didn't want him to know how much I'd heard in his tone. Emily mattered to him. She still matters to him. "I'm sorry," I said. "Sorry for bringing it up, and sorry she was gone. We should call it a night." It was late, and I didn't trust myself not to say something else I might regret. Jameson's working rhythm stopped overhead and was replaced with the sound of footsteps as he made his way to and down the raw iron spiral stairs. He positioned himself between me and the exit. "Same time tomorrow?" It suddenly felt imperative that I not let myself look up at his deep green eyes. "We're making good progress," I said, forcing myself to head for the door. "Even if we don't find a way to shortcut the process, we should be able to make it through all the shelves within the week." Jameson leaned toward me as I passed. "Don't hate me," he said softly. "Why would I hate you?" I felt my pulse jump in my throat. Because of what he just said, or because of how close he was to me? There's a slight chance we might not be done within the week." "Why not?" I asked, forgetting to avoid looking at him. He brought his lips right next to my ear. "This isn't the only library in Hawthorne House." Chapter 28. How many libraries did this place have? That was what I focused on as I walked away from Jameson. Not the feel of his body too close to mine. Not the fact that Thea hadn't been lying when she said there was a girl or that she died. Emily. I tried and failed to banish the whisper in my mind. Her name was Emily. I reached the main staircase and hesitated. If I went back to my wing now, if I tried to sleep, all I would do was replay my conversation with Jameson over and over again. I glanced back over my shoulder to see if he'd followed me, and saw Orrin instead. "Turning in for the night?" Orrin asked me. No, there was no way I could sleep, no way I could even close my eyes, so I explored. Down one long hall, I found a theater. Not a movie theater, but something closer to an opera house. The stairs were golden. The walls were golden. A red velvet curtain obscured what had to be a stage. The seats were on a recline. The ceiling arced, and when I flipped a switch, hundreds of tiny lights came to life along that arc. I remember Dr. Mack telling me about the Hawthorne's Foundation support of the arts. The next room over was filled with musical instruments, dozens of them. I bent to look at a violin with an S carved to one side of the strings, its mirror image on the other. That's a Stradivarius. Those words were issued like a threat. I turned to see Grayson standing in the hallway. I wondered if he'd been following us, and for how long. He stared at me, his pupils black and fathomless, the irises around them ice gray. You should be careful, Miss Grams. I'm not going to break anything, I said, stepping back from the violin. You should be careful, Grayson reiterated, his voice soft but deadly, with Jameson. The last thing my brother needs is you and whatever this is. I glanced at Orrin, but his face was impassive, like he couldn't hear anything but that passed between us. It's not his job to eavesdrop. It's his job to protect me, and he doesn't see Grayson as a threat. This being me, I shot back, or the terms of your grandfather's will. I wasn't the one who depended their lives. But I was here, and Tobias Hawthorne wasn't. Logically, I knew that my best option was to avoid confrontation, avoid him altogether. This was a big house. Standing this close to Grayson, it didn't feel nearly big enough. My mother hasn't left her room in days. Grayson stared at and into me. Xander nearly blew himself up today. Jameson is one bad idea away from ruining his life, and none of us can leave the estate without being hounded by the press. The property damage they've caused alone. Say nothing, turn away, don't engage. Do you think this was easy for me? I asked instead. Do you think I want to be stalked by the paparazzi? You want the money. Grayson Hawthorne looked down at me from on high. How could you not, growing up the way you did? That was just dripping with condescension. Like you don't want the money? I retorted, growing up the way you did? Maybe I haven't had everything handed to me my entire life, but you have no idea, Grayson said lowly, how ill-prepared you are. A girl like you? You don't know me. A rush of fury surged through my veins as I cut him off. I will, Grayson promised. I'll know everything about you soon enough. Every bone in my body said that he was a person who kept his promises. My access to funds might be somewhat limited currently, but the Hawthorne name still means something. There will always be people tripping over themselves to do favors for any one of us. He didn't move, didn't blink, wasn't physically aggressive in any way, but he bled power, and he knew it. Whatever you're hiding, I'll find it. Every last secret. Within days, I'll have a detailed dossier on every person in your life. Your sister, your father, your mother. Don't talk about my mother. My chest was tight. Breathing was a challenge. Stay away from my family, Miss Grams. Grayson pushed past me. I'd been dismissed. Or what? I called after him, and then, possessed by something I couldn't quite name, I continued. Or what happened to Emily will happen to me? Grayson jerked to a halt, like every muscle in his body taut. Don't you say her name. His posture was angry, but his voice sounded like it was about to crumble, like I'd gutted him. Naltish Jameson. My mouth went dry. Emily didn't just matter to Jameson. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Orrin. His expression was gentle, but clearly he wanted me to leave it alone. You won't last a month in this house. Grayson managed to pull himself together long enough to issue that prediction like a royal issuing a decree. In fact, I'd lay money that you're gone within the week. Sorry about the bird, guys. She's mad. Chapter 29. Libby found me shortly after I made my way back to my room. She was holding a stack of electronics. Alyssa said I should buy some things for you. She said you haven't bought anything for yourself. I haven't had time. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and past the point of being able to wrap my mind around anything that had happened since I moved into Hawthorne House, including Emily. Lucky for you, Libby replied, I have nothing but time. She didn't sound entirely happy about that, but before I could probe further, she began settling things on my desk. New laptop, a tablet, an e-reader loaded with romance novels in case you need some escapism. Look around at this place, I said. My life is escapism at the moment. That got a grin out of Libby. Have you seen the gym? She asked me, the awe in her voice making it clear that she had. Or the chef's kitchen? Not yet. My gaze caught suddenly on the fireplace. Sorry. And I found myself listening, wondering. Was anyone back there? You won't last a month in this house. I still didn't think Grayson had meant that as a physical threat, and Orrin certainly hadn't reacted as if my life were being threatened. Still, I shivered. Avery, there's something I have to show you. Libby flipped open my new tablet's cover. Just for the record, it's okay if you want to yell. Why would I? I cut off when I saw what she pulled up. It was a video of Drake. He was standing next to a reporter. The fact that his hair was combed told me the interview hadn't been a total surprise. The caption across the screen read, "Friend of the Grahams family." Avery was always a loner, Drake said on screen. She didn't have friends. I had Max, and that was all I needed. I'm not saying she was a bad person. I think she was just kind of desperate for attention. She wanted to matter. A girl like that, a rich old man, he trailed off. Let's just say there were definitely daddy issues. Libby cut the video off there. Can I see that? I asked, gesturing toward the tablet with murder in my heart, and probably my eyes. That's the worst of it, Libby assured me. Would you like to yell now? Not at you. I took the tablet and scrolled through the related videos, all of them interviews or think pieces all about me. Former classmates, coworkers, Libby's mom. I ignored the interviews until I got to one that I couldn't ignore. It was labeled simply, Sky Hawthorne and Zara Hawthorne Caligaris. The two of them stood behind a podium at what appeared to be some kind of press conference. So much for Grayson's assertion that his mother hadn't left her room in days. Our father was a great man. Zara's hair whipped in subtle wind. The expression on her face was stoic. He was a revolutionary entrepreneur, a once-in-a-generation philanthropist, and a man who valued family above all else. She took Sky's hand. As we grieve his passing, rest assured that we will not see his life's work die with him. The Hawthorne Foundation will continue operations. My father's numerous investments will undergo no immediate changes. While we cannot comment on the complex legalities of the current situation, I can assure you we are working with the authorities, elder abuse specialists, and a team of medical and legal professionals to get to the bottom of this situation. She turned to Sky, whose eyes brimmed with unshed tears. Perfect, picturesque, dramatic. Our father was a hero, Zara declared. We will not allow him, in death, to become a victim. To that end, we are providing the press with the results of a genetic test that proves conclusively that, contrary to the reports and speculation circling in the tabloids, Avery Grahams is not the result of infidelity on the part of our father, who is faithful to his beloved wife, our mother, for the entirety of their marriage. We as a family are as bewildered at the recent events as you, but genes don't lie. Whatever else this girl may be, she's not a Hawthorne. The video cut off. Dumbfounded, I thought back to Grayson's parting shot. I'd laid money that year gone within the week. Elder abuse specialist. Libby was aghast beside me. And the authorities, I added, plus a team of medical specialists. She might not have come right out and said that I'm under investigation for defrauding a dementia-ridden old man, but she sure as hell implied it. She doesn't get to do that. Libby was pissed, a blue-haired, ponytailed, gothic ball of fury. She can't just say whatever she wants. Call Alyssa. You have lawyers. What I had was a headache. This wasn't unexpected. Given the size of the fortune at stake, it was inevitable. Warren had warned me that the women would come after me in the courtroom. I'll call Alyssa tomorrow, I told Libby. Right now, I'm going to bed. Chapter 30. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. I didn't have to call Alyssa in the morning. She showed up and found me. Rest assured, we will shut this down. My father will be meeting with Zara and Constantine later today. Constantine, I asked. Zara's husband. Thea's uncle, I thought. They know, of course, that they stand to lose a great deal by challenging the will. Zara's debts are substantial, and they won't be cleared if she files a suit. What Zara and Constantine don't know, and what my father will make very clear to them, is that even if a judge were to rule Mr. Hawthorne's latest will to be null and void, the distribution of his estate would then be governed by his prior will, and that will be left to the Hawthorne family even less than this one. Traps upon traps. I thought about what Jameson said after the will had been read, and then I thought about the conversation I'd had with Sandra over scones. Even if you thought that you'd manipulated your grandfather into this, I guarantee he'd be the one manipulating you. How long ago did Tobias write his prior will? I asked, wondering if his only purpose had been to reinforce this one. 20 years ago, in August. Alyssa ruled out that possibility. The entire estate was to go to charity. 20 years, I repeated. That was longer than any of the Hawthornes except Nash had been alive. He disinherited his daughters 20 years ago and never told them? Apparently so. And in your answer to yesterday's inquiry, Elisa said Elisa was nothing if not efficient. The firm's records show that Mr. Hawthorne legally changed his name 20 years ago last August. Prior to that, he had no middle name. Tobias Hawthorne had given himself a middle name at the same time he disinherited his family. Tattersall. Given everything that Jameson and Xander had told me about the grandfather, it seemed like a message. Leaving the money to me, and before, to charity, wasn't the point. Disinheriting his family was. What the hell happened 20 years ago in August? I asked. Elisa seemed to be weighing her response. My eyes narrowed, and I wondered if any part of her was still loyal to Nash, to his family. Mr. Hawthorne and his wife lost their son that summer, Toby. He was 19, the youngest of their children. Elisa paused, then forged on. Toby had taken several friends to one of his parents' vacation homes. There was a fire. Toby and 3 young people perished. I tried to wrap my head around what she was saying. Tobias Hawthorne had written his daughters out of his will after the death of his son. He was never the same after Toby died. Zara had said that when she thought she'd been passed over for her sister's sons. I searched my mind for Sky's reply. Disappeared, Sky had insisted, and Zara had lost it. Why would Sky say that Toby disappeared? Elisa was caught off guard by that question. Clearly she didn't remember the exchange at the reading of the will. Between the fire and a storm that night, Elisa said once she'd recovered, Toby's remains were never definitely found. My brain worked overtime trying to integrate this information. Couldn't Zara and Sky have their lawyer argue that the old will was invalid too? I asked. Written under duress that he was mad with grief or something like that? Mr. Hawthorne signed a document reaffirming his will yearly, Elisa told me. He never changed it until me. My entire body tingled just thinking about it. How long ago was that? I asked. Last year. What could have happened to make Tobias Hawthorne decide that instead of leaving his entire fortune to charity, he was going to leave it to me? Maybe he knew my mother. Maybe he knew she died. Maybe he was sorry. Now, if your curiosity has been sated, Elisa said, I would like to return to more pressing issues. I believe my father can get a handle on Zara and Constantine. Our biggest PR issue is... Zara steeled herself. Your sister. Libby? That hadn't been what I was expecting. It's to everyone's benefit if she lies low. How could she possibly lie low? I asked. This was the biggest story on the planet. For the immediate future, I'd advised her to stay on the current estate, Lisa said, and I thought about Libby's comment that she had nothing but time. Eventually, she can think about charity work, if she would like, but for the time being, we need to be able to control the narrative, and your sister has a way of drawing attention. I wasn't sure if that was a reference to Libby's fashion choices or her black eye. Anger bubbled up inside me. My sister can wear whatever she wants, I said flatly. She can do whatever she wants. If Texas high society and the tabloids don't like it, that's too damn bad. This is a delicate situation, Elisa replied calmly, especially with the press. And Libby. She hasn't talked to the press, I said, as sure of that as I was of my own name. Her ex-boyfriend has. Her mother has. Both are looking for ways to cash in. Elisa gave me a look. I don't need to tell you that most lottery winners find their existence miserable as they drown in requests and demands from family and friends. You are blessedly short on both. Libby, however, is another matter. If Libby had been the one to inherit instead of me, she would have been incapable of saying no. She would have given and given to everyone who managed to get their hooks on her. We might consider a one-time payment to the mother, Elisa said, all business, along with a non-disclosure agreement preventing her from talking about you or Libby to the press. My stomach rebelled at the idea of giving money to Libby's mom. That woman didn't deserve a penny. But Libby didn't deserve to have to see her mother regularly trying to sell her out on the nightly news. Fine, I said, clenching my teeth, but I'm not giving anything to drink. Elisa smiled, a flash of teeth. Him I'll muzzle for fun. She held out a thick binder. In the meantime, I'd assembled some key information for you, and I have someone coming in this afternoon to work on your wardrobe and appearance. My what? Libby, as you said, can wear whatever she wants, but you don't have that luxury. Elisa shrugged. You're the real story here. Looking the part is always step one. I had no idea how this conversation had started with legal and PR issues, detoured through Hawthorne family tragedy, and ended with me being told by my lawyer that I needed a makeover. I took the binder from Melissa's outstretched hand. tossed it on the desk, then headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Elisa called after me. I almost said the library, but Jameson's warning from the other day was still fresh in my mind. "Doesn't this place have a bowling alley?"